Hi, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our research statements for the Academic Job Market Workshop, part of our series on academic job market support as offered in spring 2021 by the Writing Hub at UC San Diego. So hopefully at this point, you viewed part 1 of this resource in which we talked about the genre conventions of research statements, as well as the likely audience for research statements, and considered your writer's purpose in the research statement. So we really unpacked what is involved in a research statement and what your aims might be and what kind of grounding statements you can come back to when you are writing these. So now what we'd like to do is distill good practices for writing a research statement through reading sample research statements. And so what we will do here is we have provided companion example research statement excerpts that will be posted with this resource. You can also go to this link, https://tinyurl.com AJMSW for Academic Job Market Support Workshop. And what you will find there are 4 example excerpts from real research statements that other advanced graduate students and postdocs have kindly provided to us for other people to learn from. And so I do want to emphasize that these are real statements that belong to real people. So be kind, and as you're reading through them, kind of think about what you would want people to take away if they were reading your statements in these situations. And I think it's also really important to clarify exactly what we are reading these excerpts for. So we're not trying to read these just for content or to critique them, but we're reading from the perspective of writers. And the reason we're doing that is because we're much more likely to learn how to write a compelling research statement by paying attention to how others have done this well. So essentially, you learn how to write well by paying careful attention to how others write well. And same with learning how to frame our research or learning how to write clearly. So your objective when you are reading these statements is to distill good practices for writing a research statement. And so you might also consider the following questions as you are going through these research statement excerpts that we have from different fields. So consider, what strengths do you see in each of the statements? I would say all of them have strengths. And so what strengths do you see with each of these statements? What questions come up for you as you are reading? What questions do you still have about this person and their research? And also, what lessons can you learn from this example? So including both do's or don'ts. And so I'll tell you one of the purposes behind this as well. So it's not just to distill these good principles for writing research statements, but in doing so, you are also essentially putting yourself in the same position that people in the academic hiring committee will be in when they're reviewing their application. So you don't know and at what stage they're reading your research statement. They may have looked at the other materials in your application. They may have looked at your CV. They may not. They may know something about you, or they may not. And so in this situation, you can be reading and you will find yourself in a very similar rhetorical situation to that of the academic hiring committee that's going to be reading your statement. And this will help you be a more careful writer, because you will realize as you are reading through these statements what sorts of things people on the other side might be interested in seeing. What might they be interested in looking at? What makes for an enjoyable research statement, or a clear or easy to read research statement? So now take some time to do this. So pause the video if you want to. Okay, welcome back. So hopefully at this point you've read the different research statement excerpts that we've provided. So now we're going to do a quick reading for writing wrap-up exercise. And this is just to get those thoughts down, all those wonderful thoughts that you just had before they leave your brain. Because I know we're all busy, so it's good to write these down to just kind of reinforce those principles. So what I want you to think about are what are some useful principles to aim for, and then to think about where you are with your own statement. So thinking about kind of that conversation between these statement excerpts and then also your statement. So think about how you might apply some of these principles to your own statement. So now just pause the video and take 2 minutes and jot down how you might apply these principles that you just learned from reading these statements to your own statement, including like what do you want to make sure to include, what do you need to adjust, what do you want to be careful about, how can you convey X, Y, Z, etc. So pause and then we'll come back. Okay, so now at this point, hopefully you've written down some of the principles that you've gained from reading the research statement excerpts that we and your other colleagues have provided. And at this point, I also wanted to include a sample research statement summary from this wonderful speaker, Dr. John Boothroyd, who gave a great talk on academic job materials, specifically for R1 research institutions. So you can Google his whole talk if you want to see it. I think it's actually one of those pieces of advice that's out there that still remains humane and is generally pretty good advice and not as cynical as some other things out there, and just has a lot of really good insights and advice. But one of the things that John recommends is that you start off your research statement with kind of an overall summary, hitting on certain points. So what we're going to do is read through this example, which would have been at the top of his research statement, out loud, and then kind of unpack and see what it is that he's doing here with each of these sentences, because each one of these sentences as you'll notice, is carefully crafted to convey specific information. So let's start. So he starts off with, intracellular parasites in the phylum Apicomplexa are responsible for many serious human diseases such as malaria, cryptosporidiosis, and toxoplasmosis. One of the most remarkable features of these single-celled eukaryotes is their ability to infect another eukaryotic cell. So what he's doing here is starting off with two pieces of his research that he knows from talking to other people, that other people find both intellectually interesting and also important to human society. So we should care about these parasites because they're responsible for these devastating human diseases. And then there's also this additional component of intellectual or scientific curiosity, which is they have these remarkable ability to infect other eukaryotic cells. So then he goes on to say, toxoplasma is exceptional in that it can infect almost any animal cell it encounters by injecting its own receptor into the host cell and then using that as an anchor to pull itself in. The goal of my research is to understand, at the molecular level, how this is achieved. So now he very specifically bolded this section. So again, kind of continuing on with what makes this particular organism that he's studying, toxoplasma, so interesting and exceptional. And so maybe these are kind of words that you wouldn't necessarily use in a scientific publication or in a formal research publication, but it's something you can use in these kinds of statements. And then he steps back and is coming back to one of those big themes. So if you remember in part one where we were brainstorming some of the big themes that drive your research. So now he's thinking about, okay, so one of my big themes is to understand at the molecular level how toxoplasma can infect almost any animal cell it encounters. Okay, then he goes on to say, to accomplish this, I have used a combination of genetics, biochemistry, and structural biology, leveraging strategic collaborations that I have found to be both extremely enjoyable and highly productive. This has revealed the identities of many of the key molecules involved. For the future, I will dissect the precise mechanisms used by these molecules as they collaborate to drive toxoplasma into a cell. So now what he's doing here is a couple of really savvy things. So he's mentioning some of the fields of expertise that he has and that he will bring to this institution. So this background in genetics, biochemistry, structural biology. And he also mentions at this point that he has leveraged strategic collaborations that he has found enjoyable and highly productive. And so what he's doing here is essentially saying, I'm a team player. I like working with other people. So if you hire me and we end up working together or working in the same department for the rest of our lives, it will not be an unpleasant experience. So that's kind of a savvy thing to do. And then he also tells them specifically kind of what they will get if they hire him, what he intends to work on in the future, his plan for keeping his research alive. So in the future, he wants to dissect the precise mechanisms used by these molecules as they collaborate to drive toxoplasma into a cell. Then he continues, I hope to continue to benefit from a collaborative mindset, building a detailed understanding of the unique molecular machine these proteins represent. Ultimately, I will expand my work into the study of the related human parasite, Plasmodium species, the cause of human malaria, which shares much of the same machinery, but which has adapted to invade a single cell type in a single host species. This work will, I believe, provide new mechanistic insight into a remarkable biological process and a class of important human pathogens. So kind of coming back to what he intends on doing in the future, what is important and interesting about what he's doing, and that he has a plan for keeping his research alive in this context. And again, using some terminology that you might not use in publications, but can use in these sort of statements, referring to like a remarkable biological process. And so also note this kind of strategy that he's employed by highlighting specific, or by bolding rather, specific pieces in this big picture summary in the beginning, so that the reader, even as they're reading through quickly, can get kind of the big picture things about his research that he wants to convey. And so these are absolutely techniques that you can use in writing your own research statement. You can consider bolding or consider italicizing. I wouldn't do a mix of both of those. It starts getting a little bit messy, but choose one and stick with it. And you'll be able to highlight some of these things that you want to, and it also tends to break up the text a little bit, which is just kind of nice. So again, Dr. John Boothroyd has a really wonderful online webinar unpacking research statements specifically for R1 universities. So just Google that and feel free to check it out. It is one of the resources we recommend. Okay, and I did want to talk about some additional big picture suggestions now that we've looked at some examples, now that we've kind of unpacked what's involved in a research statement, what is your writer's purpose in producing research statements, and why these documents are even asked for. And so I want to step back and say that there are many statements or many ways of doing these statements well. And so your job as a writer is not to do all of them, but to find one that aligns authentically with you in the position. So be wary of prescriptive rules. There are a lot out there, and I would say they're not always accurate. So come back to kind of those grounding questions, that grounding purpose of why this document is being asked for, and what you want to convey about yourself and your research trajectory. And then kind of come back also to those questions of balance that we talked about in part one, and thinking about the sorts of things that you need to be weighing in balance as you're writing these research statements. One of these aspects of a balance is the level of detail. So avoid going into the weeds. This shouldn't be a regurgitation of your CV. They will also have your CV as part of your whole academic package. So for this point, what you want to do is tell this compelling, curated story of your research and your plan for keeping it alive. You also want to make your contribution approach clear enough for non-experts to get it. And I think this is something that you could see in the example research statement summary by Dr. John Boothroyd, where he did that very well. So this was not something that was written with a ton of jargon that experts outside of this field might not get, but kind of taking a step back and talking about things more generally and using more common language. And this is generally a good thing to do just because in the department that you might be applying for, the institution you might be applying for, likely there will be people outside of your particular specialized field of expertise reading these statements. And so it's important to be talking to them too. Another really important thing is to let your excitement come through, and you may have to rediscover it, and that's absolutely okay. But just remembering kind of why you got into research in the first place, what you like or even love about the research and what brings you joy in the research, and that will come through in the research statement. So doing writing exercises, including the ones we talked about, including other ones we've talked about in other workshops, I think are always a good idea just because it breaks you out of this kind of some of the conventions or icky feelings that we have about writing these things and brings us back to this excitement and joy, which if you can rediscover it or if you can bring that out, will show up in your research statement, and it's just always a good thing. You do want to tailor the statements according to the opportunity and the institution. So we talked about this in the context of several different institutional types, whether you're applying for a small liberal arts college or a large R1. You want to make sure, or you want to let the committee know that you have considered realistically what it would be like to carry out your research in this particular academic context. And that can include talking about initiatives or centers on campus or outside of campus that you can tap into, considering really important things like, are students involved in research at what level, as graduate students or as undergrads, what kind of funding opportunities are available. So just really considering all of those things, and that's why it's really important to do research on the institution that you're applying for. You want to show that you'll be an authentic and engaging colleague. And we talked about one way of doing this. You can mention specifically if this is something that's authentic to you about how you've benefited and enjoyed collaborations. And I think if you come back kind of to thinking about points of alignment between yourself and the institution that you're applying for, that authenticity will come through. And be intentional. So kind of what we've been doing throughout this whole workshop is considering ways of being intentional and doing things for a purpose. So as we broke down the sample research statement, every single one of those sentences was in there for a purpose, sometimes for multiple purposes, or we're serving a couple of purposes at once. And so it can be really helpful to learn what's interesting about your research from conversations with others. So absolutely, it's important to talk to people in your field because there are discipline and field-specific conventions when it comes to these research statements or when it comes to talking about your research. But I think you can also learn a lot by talking about your research with people outside of your field, with friends, with strangers, with colleagues in other contexts. And this will just help you practice talking about your research in different ways. And the more you troubleshoot how to frame your research and how to frame your research for different audiences, the better your framing will be. And so you can be intentional by trying out these different frames with different people and improving your ability to adjust your approach based on the audience. And if you do that, that will come through in your research statements as well. So some of our wonderful advanced graduate students and postdocs who were either on the academic job market in the past or are currently on the academic job market have been so kind as to share some of their research statements. And so these are real statements from real people with some identifying information redacted. So these are not models. And so please don't share these examples beyond this workshop. But I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a hiring committee as before when you're reading it, and read intentionally and read for what you might consider for your own research statements. So we have three that we have provided, one from history and then two different individuals from sociology. And so these can be found at these tiny URLs as above. And we would always love to have more examples so that we can broaden our pool and our fields for the different examples that we can provide in these workshops and elsewhere. So when you're done writing your own wonderful research statements, please consider sharing with the Writing Hub to benefit future scholars in your position. We would absolutely love that. And I also wanted to let you know that you have support throughout the process. So the Writing Hub is here, and we have writing resources that are specifically built and carefully designed for graduate students. And so these include things like one-on-one consultations, which you can use for any piece of writing at any stage, even if you don't, and maybe even especially if you don't have any words on a page. These are run by trained graduate consultants, and you can meet for up to 2 hours per week with different consultants or with the same consultant. We also have a graduate writing room, which is currently virtual to provide daily time and space for writing your research statements. And these are held from 9 to 11 a.m. Monday through Friday. And if you go to the Writing Hub website at UC San Diego and search Writing Room, you will get the Zoom links. You don't have to sign up. There's no commitment or anything. Just show up and be in a space of accountability and co-working. We also have weekly writing workshops, usually led by graduate consultants, sometimes by staff. The topics vary. You can see the schedule on their website. This particular quarter, which I'll talk about more, we have this focus on this academic job market support series that we're trying out for the first time. And there are also writing retreats, including 5-day or 5-week writing retreat programs that provide intensive writing time and workshops for some of your large or long-term projects, including academic job market support, dissertations, manuscripts, book projects, whatever you have. And so specifically for the academic job market support series, so we will also have workshops. So online you will find virtual resources for preparing for the academic job market. And eventually we will have teaching statements. I think the teaching statements workshop is up, a workshop on diversity statements, as well as on academic cover letters. We also have writing group sessions that are specifically designed for this academic job market support series. So it will be a time to work with peers facilitated by a graduate writing consultant who are also putting together their academic job market materials. And then on June 4th, we're holding a peer feedback workshop for your academic job market support for your academic job market materials. And I just want to end by saying we welcome your feedback. So this is our first time running this workshop and doing this virtual walkthrough, and your feedback really matters. So please feel free to go to this website and provide your feedback. We welcome any and all feedback on these workshops. And good luck putting together all your academic job market support series. And I hope we see you at some of these additional offerings that we have.